The rain fell relentlessly, blanketing the city in a cold, unyielding darkness. Detective Ava Ramirez stepped out of her car, the dim glow of the streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement. The Rosemont Hotel loomed ahead, its elegant facade now tainted by the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers parked outside. A call had come in barely an hour ago, a homicide in the penthouse suite. The victim was Robert Sterling, a man whose name carried both prestige and controversy. Ava pulled her coat tighter around her as she approached the entrance, her expression unreadable but her mind already sifting through possibilities. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent, save for the occasional crackle of a police radio. When the doors slid open, Ava was greeted by the sterile glow of the hallway lights and the muted murmur of officers and forensic technicians. At the threshold of the penthouse, she paused. The scene inside was one of stark contrasts, opulence and violence entwined. Sterling's body lay in the bedroom, a single gunshot wound to the chest. Around him, the remnants of what was meant to be an intimate evening, spilled champagne, a shattered glass, and scattered rose petals. The air was heavy with the faint, cloying scent of roses, mingling with the metallic tang of blood. Ava moved closer, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. Sterling's lifeless hand was curled around something. She crouched down and carefully pried his fingers open to reveal a playing card, the Queen of Spades. The card was pristine, untouched by the blood pooling beneath him. Ava tilted her head slightly, steadying it, her mind already working through the implications. A message, she thought. But from whom? And why? The room told a story, but it was one that felt too rehearsed. The champagne bottle lay on its side, the liquid forming a perfect arc as it spilled across the floor. The rose petals were scattered in a way that seemed deliberate, as though someone had arranged them for effect. Ava's instincts prickled. This wasn't just a crime of passion or a random act of violence. It was staged. She turned to the lead forensic technician, who was kneeling near the body. "Time of death?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "Roughly 2 hours ago," the technician replied without looking up. "No signs of forced entry." "Whoever did this, Sterling let them in." Ava nodded, her gaze shifting to the walls of the suite. The decor was modern, expensive, but impersonal. Sterling's wealth was evident, but nothing here suggested a life of substance. She moved to the bedside table, where a leather-bound journal caught her eye. Flipping it open, she found pages filled with notes and sketches, plans for a new business venture, fragments of poetry, and what appeared to be a list of names. One name was circled, Elena Vargas. The name tugged at Ava's memory. Vargas was an artist, known for her provocative work and her connection to Sterling. Rumors had swirled about their relationship, though neither had ever confirmed it. Ava closed the journal and slipped it into an evidence bag. Vargas would be her first call. Back in the hallway, Ava questioned the hotel staff. The concierge confirmed that Sterling had arrived alone earlier in the evening but had requested a bottle of champagne and a single rose be sent to his room. A room service attendant mentioned seeing a woman enter the suite shortly after Sterling. She was tall, striking, and wore a red dress. The description was vague, but it matched Vargas's public persona. "Did she give a name?" Ava asked, but the attendant shook his head. "No, ma'am. She wasn't a registered guest. Sterling must have let her in himself." Ava's mind churned. Vargas was a potential suspect, but the meticulous nature of the scene suggested something more. This wasn't just about love or jealousy. There was a larger game at play. At the precinct, Ava and her partner, Detective Marcus Hale, began piecing together Sterling's life in the hours leading up to his death. Marcus, younger and more impulsive than Ava, sifted through Sterling's financial records while she reviewed the security footage from the hotel. The footage confirmed the attendant's account. A woman in a red dress entered the penthouse at 9:43 p.m. and left 20 minutes later. "She's not in a hurry," Marcus observed, leaning over Ava's shoulder. "Whoever she is, she's calm." "Collected." Ava nodded. "Too calm. She knew exactly what she was doing." They ran the footage through facial recognition software, and a match came back within minutes: Elena Vargas. Her file revealed a history that was far from clean. In addition to her art career, Vargas had ties to several high-profile scandals, including allegations of art theft and money laundering. Sterling's name appeared in connection with some of these cases, though no formal charges had ever been filed. "She's not just an artist," Ava muttered. "She's a player." Digging deeper, Ava discovered that Vargas's recent work had taken on a darker tone. Her most recent gallery exhibit, titled The Game of Hearts, featured paintings of broken relationships, betrayal, and revenge. One piece, in particular, caught Ava's attention: a canvas depicting a queen of spades surrounded by flames. "She's sending a message," Ava said, showing the image to Marcus. But to who? And why? The next morning, Ava visited Vargas's studio, a sprawling space filled with half-finished canvases and the smell of turpentine. Vargas wasn't there, but Ava found a sketchbook that offered more clues. Among the pages were drawings that mirrored the crime scene: a man lying on a bed of rose petals, a playing card clutched in his hand, and a gunshot wound to the chest. "She planned this," Ava said aloud, her voice tinged with both awe and frustration. "Every detail." Ava's phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "We traced the license plate of the car she used to leave the hotel. It's registered to a shell company. One that's tied to an organization called the Broken Hearts Society." The name sent a chill down Ava's spine. The Broken Hearts Society was rumored to be a secretive group of elites who used betrayal and manipulation as both art and currency. They operated in shadows, leaving behind symbols and victims in equal measure. "She's not working alone," Ava realized. "This is bigger than Vargas." Sterling was just a pawn. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Ava knew one thing for certain: the Queen of Spades wasn't just a card. It was a calling card. And Vargas, or whoever she was working for, wasn't finished playing their game. Ava stared at the sketchbook for a long moment, her thoughts racing. The sketches weren't just chillingly accurate, they felt like a narrative, a story unfolding piece by piece. The images seemed to suggest that Sterling's death was only the first chapter. The Broken Hearts Society wasn't just a myth, she realized. It was real, and Vargas had brought it to life with her art. She slipped the sketchbook into her bag and left the studio, her gut telling her that time was running out. Vargas wasn't the type to wait around. If she had orchestrated Sterling's murder, there was a reason for it, one that likely involved her next move. Back at the precinct, Marcus was already at his desk, poring over files. His youthful energy was a stark contrast to Ava's steady resolve. "I dug up more about the Broken Hearts Society," he said as she walked in. "It's not just an underground group. It's practically a cult. They target people who've betrayed others, cheaters, liars, corporate thieves. The society isn't about money, it's about retribution." Ava raised an eyebrow. "So they think they're vigilantes?" "More like executioners," Marcus replied grimly. "But they don't just kill for revenge. They make it personal, symbolic. Every murder is a statement." Ava sank into her chair, her mind replaying the details of Sterling's murder. The rose petals, the champagne, the Queen of Spades, it was all symbolic, but of what? Sterling had plenty of enemies. He was ruthless in business, known for stealing ideas and running competitors into the ground. But was that enough to put him on the society's radar? "Did you find anything that connects Sterling to Vargas before this?" she asked. Marcus nodded. "A few months ago, Sterling bought one of Vargas's paintings at a private auction. It was called The Betrayer's Crown. Paid a fortune for it. But here's the kicker: the painting was stolen from Vargas's gallery a week later. She accused him of orchestrating the theft, but nothing was ever proven." Ava leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "So she had a motive. But this feels bigger than just payback for a stolen painting." Marcus hesitated. "There's one more thing. Sterling's financial records show he made a series of payments to a private offshore account. The payment started 6 months ago and ended 2 days before his death. The account is registered to someone named Gabriel Kane. Ava froze. Gabriel Kane was a name she hadn't heard in years, but it sent a chill through her all the same. He was a ghost, a shadow in the criminal underworld, known for orchestrating elaborate schemes and disappearing without a trace. If Kane was involved, it meant this wasn't just about Vargas or even Sterling. It was part of a much larger game. "What the hell is Kane doing in this?" she muttered, more to herself than to Marcus. Marcus looked uneasy. "You think he's pulling the strings?" Ava nodded slowly. "If Vargas is the queen, Kane is the king. And if the society is real, then he's building something far bigger than we can see." The pieces were starting to connect, but the picture they formed was terrifying. Ava knew she needed to move fast. Vargas might have been the one to kill Sterling, but Kane was the mastermind. And if he was involved, there would be more bodies to come. That night, Ava couldn't sleep. She sat in her dimly lit apartment, the sketchbook open on her kitchen table. Each image felt like a riddle, each detail a clue she hadn't yet uncovered. Her eyes kept returning to one sketch, a figure standing in front of a burning spade, their face obscured. Beneath the drawing were 3 words, "The Final Hand." Her phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was Marcus. "We've got another victim," he said, his voice tense. "Same M.O., playing card, rose petals, champagne. This time it's a woman. A journalist named Erica Lang. She was investigating Sterling's business deals." Ava's stomach turned. The society wasn't just targeting the guilty, they were targeting anyone who stood in their way. By the time Ava arrived at the scene, the pattern was unmistakable. Lang's body was arranged with the same precision as Sterling's. The card this time was the Jack of Hearts, placed neatly on her chest. The message was clear: the society was escalating, and they wanted Ava to know it. As she studied the scene, Ava's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a text from an unknown number. The message was short, but it made her blood run cold. "You're next, detective." Ava clenched her jaw, her mind racing. The society was watching her, playing with her. But she wasn't about to back down. If Kane and Vargas wanted to draw her into their game, she'd play, but on her own terms. Ava stared at the text message, her pulse quickening. She read it again, slower this time, as if the words might shift or reveal some hidden meaning. "You're next, detective." She held her phone tightly, her knuckles whitening, before slipping it back into her pocket. Whoever had sent this wasn't just taunting her, they wanted her to feel the weight of their presence, to know they were always one step ahead. But fear wasn't something Ava entertained easily. If anything, it steeled her resolve. She turned back to the crime scene. Erica Lang's body told the same story as Robert Sterling's, a carefully staged tableau, with every detail meticulously planned. The crimson-stained petals scattered around her formed a deliberate pattern, almost like a spiral that drew the eye toward her chest, where the Jack of Hearts rested. Ava crouched beside the body, studying the card. Unlike Sterling's Queen of Spades, this card bore faint smudges along the edges, as though it had been handled with less care. A rushed detail? Or intentional? "Anything stand out?" Marcus asked from behind her, his voice low. "The card," she replied without looking up. "It's different this time. Careless. Or maybe it's meant to look that way." She stood, her mind racing. This wasn't just a murder. It's a performance. They're escalating, trying to get bolder with each act. Marcus frowned. "So what do we do next?" Vargas is still off the grid, and Kane's just a name without a face. Ava turned to him, her expression hard. "We stop waiting for them to make the next move. We force their hand." Back at the precinct, Ava began poring over Erica Lang's files. The journalist had been investigating Robert Sterling for months, digging into his offshore accounts and questionable business deals. One folder, in particular, caught Ava's attention. It was labeled the Hearts Network. Inside were copies of emails, wire transfers, and cryptic notes linking Sterling to a network of high-profile individuals who seemed to operate outside the law. Politicians, CEOs, artists, it was a laundry list of powerful people, all connected by one thing: secrecy. Ava's gut told her that this wasn't just about Sterling or Vargas. The society was bigger than she'd imagined, and Erica Lang had gotten too close to the truth. "Take a look at this," she said, sliding the folder across to Marcus. Lang was onto something big. Sterling wasn't just a target, he was a key player. And the society took him out before he could become a liability. Marcus scanned the documents, his brow furrowing. If Lang found this, it means there's more out there. She must have had a source, someone feeding her this information. Ava nodded. And whoever that source is, they're in danger. We need to find them before the society does. The search for Lang's source led Ava and Marcus to a quiet, nondescript apartment building on the outskirts of the city. The name on the lease, Colin Rourke, a data analyst with no known connections to Sterling or Vargas. Ava knocked on the door, her hand instinctively hovering near her holstered weapon. The man who opened the door was in his mid-30s, with disheveled hair and dark circles under his eyes. He froze when he saw Ava's badge. "I'm Detective Ramirez," she said, her tone firm but not unkind. "This is Detective Hale. We need to talk." Rourke hesitated, glancing nervously down the hallway before stepping aside to let them in. His apartment was a chaotic mess of papers, computer monitors, and half-empty coffee mugs. "You're here about Erica," he said, his voice shaky. Ava nodded. "We know she was working with you. We need to know what you've uncovered. It's the only way we can stop this." Rourke ran a hand through his hair, his anxiety palpable. "I didn't think they'd actually killed her," he muttered, almost to himself. "I told her to back off, that she was getting too close. But she wouldn't listen." "Close to what?" Ava pressed. Rourke gestured to his cluttered desk. "The Broken Hearts Society. It's not just a group, it's a network, a system. They operate like a secret society, using symbols and codes to communicate. Sterling was one of their key players, but he started to get sloppy. He was laundering money for them, but he kept too many records. Erica found those records." "What kind of records?" Marcus asked. Rourke pulled up a file on his computer, his hands trembling as he navigated through dozens of encrypted folders. Wire transfers, meeting schedules, coded messages. It's all there. But there's one thing that stood out, a list. "A list?" Ava leaned in, her heart pounding. Rourke opened a document. It was a spreadsheet with dozens of names, each accompanied by a playing card symbol. Ava scanned the list, recognizing some of the names immediately: CEOs, politicians, artists. All of them powerful. All of them marked. "What do the symbols mean?" she asked. "It's a hierarchy," Rourke explained. "The cards represent their roles in the society. Kings and queens are the leaders, the ones who make the decisions. Jacks are their enforcers. And the lower cards," he hesitated. "The victims," Ava finished for him. Rourke nodded. Sterling was a king. Erica was a 10. And they're working their way down the deck. Ava's blood ran cold. If the society was working through the list systematically, then every name on it was a target. She needed to act fast. "Can you trace where these messages are coming from?" she asked. Rourke hesitated. "I can try, but they're heavily encrypted. It could take hours, maybe days." "We don't have days," Ava said, her voice steely. "Do what you can. And stay here. If you leave, you'll be next." Rourke nodded, visibly shaken. "I'll do my best." As Ava and Marcus left the apartment, her phone buzzed again. Another message from the unknown number. "You're running out of time." Ava clenched her jaw, her mind racing. The society was watching her every move, but she wasn't about to back down. If they wanted to play games, she'd play. but she'd make sure she was the one holding the final card. The city stretched out before Ava like a labyrinth, its lights flickering in the rain-soaked streets below. Each puddle seemed to reflect her growing frustration. The Broken Hearts Society was more than an organization, it was a carefully orchestrated web, and she could feel herself being drawn into its center. The text messages weren't just warnings, they were bait. And she had no choice but to follow the trail, knowing full well she could be walking into a trap. Back at the precinct, Marcus was already working furiously, pinning names, photos, and connections onto the investigation board. The spreadsheet Rourke had provided was the breakthrough they needed to map out the society's structure. Ava stood silently for a moment, studying the faces staring back at her from the board. Robert Sterling, Erica Lang, Elena Vargas, Gabriel Kane. Each one a piece of the puzzle, yet the overall picture remained maddeningly unclear. "They've got a new target," Marcus said, breaking the silence. He pointed to a name circled on the spreadsheet, Victor Duval. Duval's a venture capitalist. Big name in tech and real estate. He's throwing a gala tomorrow night at the Westmore Grand Hotel. If the society's following their pattern, he's next. Ava's eyes narrowed. We can't wait for them to strike. If he's their next target, we need to get to him first. Already tried, Marcus said grimly. His security team isn't taking us seriously. They think it's a prank. He gestured toward a photo of the man, a smug, middle-aged tycoon in an expensive suit. Duval's not exactly known for taking advice, especially from the cops. Ava sighed, her frustration simmering. Then we'll have to go to the gala ourselves. If the society's planning to make a move, they'll have to show their hand. The Westmore Grand Hotel gleamed like a jewel in the heart of the city, its grand ballroom alive with the chatter of the city's elite. Ava and Marcus entered through a side door, dressed in plain evening attire to avoid drawing attention. The room was a sea of glittering gowns and tailored suits, but Ava's sharp eyes scanned every corner, searching for anything out of place. Duval was easy to spot. He stood near the bar, surrounded by admirers, his laugh booming over the soft strains of the live orchestra. He exuded an air of untouchable arrogance, but Ava could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes darted toward the exits whenever he thought no one was looking. He knows something, Marcus murmured, stepping up beside her. He's nervous. Good, Ava replied. Let's make him more nervous. They approached Duval, their movements deliberate but unthreatening. Ava flashed her badge just enough for him to see. Victor Duval, she asked, her voice calm but firm. Duval's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly, his charm snapping into place like a mask. Detective, is it? What brings you to my little soiree? Your life might be in danger, Ava said bluntly. We have reason to believe you're being targeted by a very dangerous group. Duval's smile didn't waver, but his eyes darkened. I think you're mistaken. I'm perfectly safe here, as you can see. My security team is the best money can buy. Robert Sterling thought the same thing, Ava replied. And he's dead. For a moment, the mask slipped. Duval's jaw tightened, and his hand gripped the edge of the bar. Sterling was reckless, he said finally. He made enemies. I don't. Ava leaned in closer, lowering her voice. You're on their list, Mr. Duval. And if you don't start talking, you're going to end up like Sterling and Erica Lang. Tell us what you know about the Broken Hearts Society. Duval's face drained of color. He glanced around the room, as if expecting someone to be watching. I can't, he hissed. You don't understand. They'll kill me. They'll kill you anyway, Ava said, her tone razor sharp. The only chance you have is with us. Before Duval could respond, the lights in the ballroom flickered. The room fell silent for a heartbeat before the orchestra picked up again, but Ava's instincts were already on high alert. She scanned the crowd, her hand moving instinctively toward the concealed weapon at her side. And then she saw her. Elena Vargas. She stood near the edge of the room, her striking red dress a beacon in the sea of black and white. Her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile when her eyes met Ava's. She raised a glass of champagne in a mock toast before turning and disappearing into the crowd. "She's here," Ava said, her voice tight. Marcus followed her gaze. "Vargas? Are you sure?" "Positive," Ava said, already moving. "Stay with Duval. Keep him in sight." Ava weaved through the crowd, her eyes locked on the path Vargas had taken. She pushed past a group of guests, ignoring their protests, and slipped into a side hallway. The noise of the ballroom faded, replaced by the muffled hum of the hotel's air conditioning. The hallway was empty, save for the faint click of heels echoing in the distance. Ava followed the sound, her pulse quickening. She turned a corner and saw Vargas at the end of the hallway, standing in front of an emergency exit. For a moment, they locked eyes, and then Vargas pushed the door open and disappeared into the night. Ava broke into a run, bursting through the door and into a dimly lit alley. The rain had started again, cold and relentless. Vargas was already halfway down the alley, her figure illuminated briefly by a passing car. Ava shouted after her, but Vargas didn't stop. She turned a corner, and Ava followed, her heart pounding. When she rounded the corner, Vargas was gone. The alley was empty, save for a single object lying in the center of the pavement. Ava approached cautiously, her hand on her weapon. It was another playing card. The King of Hearts. Ava picked it up, her mind racing. Vargas had left it for her, a deliberate move. But what did it mean? Was it a warning? A clue? Or something else entirely? Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and read the message on the screen. "You're in deeper than you know." Ava clenched her jaw, the card trembling slightly in her hand. The game was far from over, and the stakes were higher than she'd imagined. But if Vargas and the society thought they could intimidate her, they were wrong. She wasn't backing down. The rain continued to pound against the alley as Ava stood still, the King of Hearts dampening in her gloved hand. Her breaths came in short, sharp bursts, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. Vargas was slipping through her fingers, but this wasn't over. The card wasn't just a taunt, it was a message. One she had yet to decode. By the time Ava returned to the ballroom, the tension was palpable. Guests murmured in hushed tones, their unease growing as rumors of the police presence spread. Marcus was exactly where she'd left him, standing near the bar with Victor Duval, whose confidence had visibly eroded. His face was pale, and his glass of whiskey trembled in his hand. "She was here," Ava said quietly as she approached Marcus. "Vargas. She wanted me to see her." Marcus's eyebrows shot up. "Did you catch her?" "No," Ava admitted, her frustration barely contained. "She handed him the King of Hearts. She left me this." Marcus examined the card, his lips pressing into a thin line. "She's playing with us." "Or trying to tell us something," Ava countered. She turned her attention to Duval, her voice sharp. "You're running out of time, Mr. Duval. Vargas is here. The society is here. If you know anything, now is the moment to speak." Duval's hand gripped the edge of the bar so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He scanned the room nervously before leaning in closer to Ava and Marcus. "You don't understand how they operate," he whispered. "They don't just kill you. They ruin you first. Your legacy, your reputation, your family, they'll destroy everything before they take your life. That's why I can't." His words were cut short by the piercing sound of glass shattering. Ava's head snapped toward the source of the noise, her hand instinctively reaching for her weapon. A server had dropped a tray, but the sound sent ripples of unease through the room. The orchestra faltered for a moment before resuming, but Ava's instincts screamed that something was wrong. "Stay here," she ordered Marcus, her eyes locking on Duval. "Don't let him out of your sight." Marcus nodded, positioning himself protectively beside the trembling tycoon. Ava moved swiftly through the room, her sharp gaze scanning every face and every corner. She knew Vargas wouldn't act in the open, not with so many witnesses. But Ava couldn't shake the feeling that the society had already set something in motion. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She snatched it out, her heart sinking as she read the latest text from the unknown number. Checkmate. Her stomach twisted. She immediately turned back toward Marcus and Duval, but the crowd had shifted, and she couldn't see them. Pushing through clusters of guests, she called out, her voice cutting through the noise. Marcus. No response. She reached the bar, her chest tightening when she realized both Marcus and Duval were gone. The glass of whiskey Duval had been holding was still on the counter, untouched. Ava spun around, her mind racing. Had they moved? Or had something happened? Ava's phone buzzed again. Another message. He's ours now. She swore under her breath, shoving her way toward the nearest exit. The crowd's chatter became a dull roar in her ears as she replayed the last few minutes in her head. Marcus wouldn't have left without telling her. He wouldn't have let Duval disappear without a fight. The exit door led to a service hallway, and Ava's heart sank when she saw Marcus's phone lying on the ground, its screen cracked. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no overturned furniture, but the silence was deafening. Ava crouched to pick up the phone, her senses on high alert. Before she could stand, she heard it, the faint sound of footsteps echoing from further down the hall. She drew her weapon and moved cautiously, her footsteps silent against the tiled floor. The hallway ended at another door, this one marked with a sign that read staff only. Ava pushed it open slowly, her breath catching when she saw what lay on the other side. It was a storage room, dimly lit and cluttered with cleaning supplies. In the center of the room, a chair had been placed beneath the flickering fluorescent light. On the chair sat Victor Duval, his head slumped forward, his hands bound to the armrests with thick rope. Ava rushed forward, her weapon still drawn. Duval, she hissed, but as she reached him, she realized it was already too late. His chest wasn't moving. His skin was pale, lifeless. A single bullet hole marred the center of his forehead, and in his lap sat another playing card, the ace of spades. Ava's heart pounded as she scanned the room, looking for any sign of the killer. The door behind her creaked faintly, and she spun around, her weapon raised. But the hallway was empty. Her phone buzzed again, the sound slicing through the silence. She didn't need to look to know it was another message. You're next. Ava clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay calm. She holstered her weapon and quickly called for backup, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. By the time the precinct's forensics team arrived, Marcus was still nowhere to be found. Ava's frustration and fear were mounting. The society wasn't just a step ahead, they were running the game. Every move she made felt anticipated, every clue left deliberately to taunt her. But Duval's death had shifted something. The ace of spades wasn't just a card, it was the highest card in the deck. The society was sending a message, not just to Ava, but to anyone who tried to stand in their way. As the forensics team worked, Ava's phone buzzed again. This time, the message was different. The king has fallen. Now for the queen. Ava's pulse quickened. The queen. Vargas. She realized with sudden clarity that Vargas wasn't just a player in the game, she was a target too. The society was using her as a pawn, just as they were using Ava. And if Ava didn't act fast, Vargas wouldn't live long enough to reveal the truth. She stepped out of the storage room, her mind racing. She had to find Vargas before the society did. But to do that, she'd have to think like them. The rules of the game had changed. And this time, Ava wasn't going to wait for them to make the next move. Ava stood outside the storage room, the cold air of the service hallway doing little to cool the fire burning inside her. The society's taunts had gone too far. Marcus was missing, Duval was dead, and Vargas was now in more danger than ever. She clenched her fists, her jaw tightening as she replayed the last message in her mind, the king has fallen. Now for the queen. Vargas wasn't just an accomplice anymore, she was a target. But why? What had shifted in the society's game? Ava didn't have all the answers, but she knew one thing: if Vargas fell, the chance to expose the society might fall with her. She stormed out of the Westmore Grand Hotel, her phone pressed to her ear. "Dispatch, this is Detective Ramirez," she said, her voice sharp. "I need an APB on Elena Vargas. I don't care how thin our lead is, search every gallery, every safe house, every damn coffee shop she's ever set foot in. I need her location ASAP." The dispatcher acknowledged her request, but Ava knew the search would take time the society wouldn't give her. She slid into her car, her mind racing. Vargas was always one step ahead, always elusive. If Ava wanted to find her, she'd have to think like her. Her fingers drummed against the steering wheel as she considered her next move. Vargas wasn't just an artist, she was a storyteller, someone who thrived on symbolism. The cards, the roses, the champagne, it was all part of a larger narrative. Ava pulled out her phone and opened the photos she'd taken of Vargas's sketchbook. Each drawing was meticulous, almost obsessive in its detail. One, in particular, caught her eye, a burning queen of spades, her face shrouded in shadow. Beneath the drawing were two words scrawled in bold, jagged letters: "The Safe House." Ava's eyes narrowed. Vargas wasn't just creating art, she was leaving clues. If Vargas had a safe house, it would be somewhere personal, somewhere tied to her past. Ava quickly searched Vargas's file, scanning for anything that might point her in the right direction. Then she saw it, a small cabin listed under Vargas's name in a rural area just outside the city. It had been inherited from her grandmother, a reclusive woman who had lived there for decades before her death. The property had been off the grid for years, and Vargas had never sold it. "That's where you're hiding," Ava muttered to herself, starting the car. The drive to the cabin was long, the urban sprawl giving way to winding roads and dense forests. The rain had let up, but the sky remained heavy with dark clouds. Ava's headlights cut through the gloom as she navigated the narrow, twisting paths, her grip on the wheel tightening with every mile. When she finally reached the property, the cabin was exactly as she'd imagined: small, weathered, and surrounded by overgrown trees. The windows were dark, but Ava could feel the weight of someone watching her. She stepped out of the car, her hand resting on her holstered weapon. "Vargas," she called out, her voice steady. "I know you're here. We need to talk." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, from the shadows, a voice replied. "You shouldn't have come." Ava turned sharply, her eyes narrowing as Vargas emerged from behind a tree. She was still wearing the red dress from the gala, though it was now damp and smeared with dirt. Her expression was guarded, but Ava could see the fear lurking beneath her composure. "You're in danger," Ava said, taking a cautious step forward. "The society's turned on you. They're coming for you next." Vargas laughed bitterly. "You think I don't know that? I've been running from them for weeks. Sterling was my only protection, and now he's dead because of me." "Not because of you," Ava corrected. "Because of them. They're the ones pulling the strings. But if you want to survive, you need to help me take them down." Vargas's eyes narrowed. "Why should I trust you? You're just another player in their game." Ava shook her head. "I'm not playing their game. I'm ending it. But I can't do that without you. You know the society better than anyone. You know their secrets." For a long moment, Vargas said nothing. Then, with a sigh, she gestured for Ava to follow her inside the cabin. The interior was sparse, but it bore the marks of someone who had been living there recently. A small cot was pushed against the wall, and the table was cluttered with papers, photographs, and maps. Ava's eyes immediately went to the largest map, which was covered in red pens and scribbled notes. "This is everything I have on the society," Vargas said, her voice weary. "Their members, their operations, their patterns. But it's not enough. They're too powerful, too connected." Ava studied the map, her brow furrowing. "What about Kane?" she asked. "He's the one holding it all together, isn't he?" Vargas flinched at the name. "Kane is untouchable. He's not just the king, he's the architect. Everything the society does, every move they make, it's all his design. If you go after him, he'll see you coming a mile away. Then we make him come to us, Ava said. Vargas looked at her skeptically. And how do you plan to do that? Ava's mind raced. The society thrived on control, on precision. Cain wouldn't move unless he thought he had the upper hand. But if they could disrupt that control, if they could force him to act impulsively. We take out his network, Ava said finally. One piece at a time. We make him vulnerable. Vargas hesitated, then nodded slowly. If you're serious about this, there's one place you need to start. The society's next meeting. It's happening tomorrow night. Ava's eyes widened. You know where? Vargas nodded. An abandoned theater in the warehouse district. It's where they initiate new members. But it'll be dangerous. If they catch you. They won't, Ava said firmly. Not if we move fast. She turned to leave, but Vargas grabbed her arm. Wait, she said, her voice trembling. If you're going after them, you need to know something. Cain isn't just playing a game. He's building an empire. And once you're in his sights, there's no way out. Ava met Vargas's gaze, her resolve unshaken. Then it's a good thing I'm not looking for a way out. The rain had started again by the time Ava left the cabin, the steady rhythm on her car roof mirroring the pounding in her chest. Vargas's words echoed in her mind. Cain isn't just playing a game. He's building an empire. Ava gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles white. She had faced dangerous criminals before, but this was different. Cain wasn't just a man, he was a shadow, a ghost that moved silently but left destruction in his wake. And now, Ava was stepping into his world. Back at the precinct, the tension was palpable. Officers moved briskly through the station, their voices low. Ava entered with purpose, her damp coat clinging to her shoulders as she headed straight for the operations board. The faces of the society's victims stared back at her, a grim reminder of what was at stake. She slammed a new photo onto the board, a grainy image of Gabriel Cain, pulled from an old surveillance tape. It wasn't much, but it was enough to put a face to the name. This is our target, she said, her voice cutting through the noise. Gabriel Cain. He's the leader. The architect. And we need to bring him down. Marcus's empty desk loomed in the corner, a stark reminder of her partner's disappearance. Ava felt a pang of guilt but quickly pushed it aside. She couldn't afford to be distracted. Not now. One of the younger officers, a rookie named Daniels, approached cautiously. Detective Ramirez, he said, handing her a folder. You asked for any intel on the warehouse district. We found something. Ava opened the folder and scanned the contents. A series of recent surveillance reports detailed unusual activity at an abandoned theater on the edge of the district. Late-night deliveries, unmarked vans, and figures entering and leaving at odd hours. It matched Vargas's tip perfectly. This is it, Ava said, her adrenaline spiking. They're meeting here tomorrow night. We're going in. Daniels hesitated. Detective, if this is the society, it's not going to be a simple raid. These people are dangerous. Ava's eyes hardened. I know exactly what they are. That's why we can't wait. Every second we hesitate, they kill someone else. We don't have the luxury of caution. She turned to the room, addressing the officers who had gathered around. This isn't just about stopping a criminal organization. This is about taking down a network that's been untouchable for too long. They think they're above the law. Tomorrow night, we prove them wrong. The theater was a relic of a bygone era, its once grand facade now crumbling under decades of neglect. Ava crouched behind a row of dumpsters in the alley, her team spread out around the perimeter. The night was oppressively quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. She adjusted her earpiece, her voice low as she spoke into the mic. Team 1, report. Clear on the north side, came the reply. No movement. Team 2? Southside secured, another voice confirmed. Waiting on your signal. Ava's heart pounded as she peered around the corner. The building was dark, but a faint glow seeped through the cracks of the boarded-up windows. Someone was inside. She signaled to her team, her hand steady despite the tension coiling in her chest. Move in, she ordered. The teams converged on the theater, their movements swift and silent. Ava led the charge, her weapon drawn as she pushed through the side entrance. The air inside was heavy with dust and decay, the faint scent of mildew clinging to every surface. She moved cautiously, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The main auditorium was cavernous, its seats long since rotted away. But the stage was intact, and on it stood a long wooden table. Around the table sat 6 figures, their faces obscured by masks of playing cards, kings, queens, jacks. At the head of the table sat a man wearing a mask shaped like the ace of spades. Gabriel Kane. Ava's breath caught as she took in the scene. The society was here, in the flesh, their eerie stillness radiating power and control. Kane's voice broke the silence, smooth and commanding. Detective Ramirez, he said, his tone almost amused. We've been expecting you. The lights suddenly flared to life, blinding Ava momentarily. When her vision cleared, she realized her team was gone. The earpiece crackled with static, useless. Panic threatened to claw at her, but she forced it down, her grip tightening on her weapon. Kane stood, his mask gleaming in the harsh light. You've come so far, he said, spreading his arms. But I wonder, do you even know why you're here? Ava's voice was steady, defiant. I'm here to stop you. To dismantle your network and bring you down. Kane laughed, a low, menacing sound. You think this is about me? About the society? No, detective. This is about you. Before she could react, the figures around the table rose, their movements synchronized and deliberate. Kane gestured toward her, his voice echoing through the empty theater. Do you know what makes a good player, detective? Sacrifice. You've already sacrificed so much. Your partner, your safety, your sanity. And yet, you keep playing. Ava's pulse quickened as the figures moved closer, their masks gleaming in the light. Where's Marcus? She demanded, her voice sharp. Kane tilted his head, as if considering her question. Your partner played his part well. But every game needs a casualty. Would you like to see him? Before she could respond, a side door creaked open, and 2 masked figures dragged Marcus into the room. His face was bruised, his movements sluggish, but he was alive. Barely. Let him go, Ava growled, her weapon trained on Kane. Kane's voice remained calm, almost mocking. You're in no position to negotiate, detective. But let's make this interesting. A choice, if you will. You can save your partner, or you can stop us. But you can't do both. The room seemed to close in around her, the weight of the decision crushing. Ava's mind raced, every instinct screaming at her to act. But she knew, deep down, that whatever choice she made, the society had already planned for it. She locked eyes with Marcus, his gaze filled with both fear and an unspoken plea. Then she turned back to Kane, her jaw tightening. You think you can control the game, she said, her voice low and steady. But I'm not playing by your rules. Kane's smile was visible even through the mask. Oh, detective. That's exactly what we're counting on. Ava's mind raced, the weight of Kane's ultimatum pressing down on her like a vice. The society had engineered this moment perfectly, setting her up to make an impossible choice, save her partner or stop the network of killers that had already claimed so many lives. Her heart pounded in her chest, but her eyes never left Kane's masked face. She couldn't afford to show weakness, not now. The figures surrounding her began to close in, their movements deliberate, like predators tightening the noose around their prey. Marcus, bloodied and bound, slumped slightly between the 2 masked enforcers holding him upright. His eyes found Ava's, and in them, she saw a flicker of defiance, an unspoken command, don't let them win. Ava tightened her grip on her weapon. She had no intention of letting them win. "Let me make something clear," she said, her voice cutting through the oppressive quiet. "You don't control me. You think you've set the rules, but I'm not playing your game." Kane chuckled softly, the sound chilling in the cavernous theater. "Ah, but Detective Ramirez, that's where you're wrong. The moment you stepped into this room, you became a piece on the board. And now," he gestured toward Marcus with a gloved hand, "it's your move." Ava took a slow, deliberate step forward, her weapon still trained on Kane. "You made one mistake," she said, her tone icy. "You underestimated me." With that, she shifted her aim and fired, not at Kane, but at the light fixture above the stage. The bulb shattered in an explosion of sparks, plunging the room into partial darkness. The sudden chaos gave her the opening she needed. She dove to the side, rolling behind a row of decaying theater seats as the society's enforcers scrambled to respond. Shouts echoed through the theater as Ava moved swiftly, using the shadows to her advantage. She could hear Marcus struggling against his captors, their voices raised in confusion. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she forced herself to focus. She needed to act quickly, decisively. From her position behind the seats, Ava spotted one of the masked enforcers advancing toward her, their silhouette outlined by the faint glow of the remaining lights. She steadied her breathing, waited for the right moment, and then sprang into action. In one fluid motion, she disarmed the enforcer and knocked him unconscious with the butt of her weapon. The commotion drew the attention of the others, and Ava used the distraction to her advantage. She darted toward the stage, her eyes locking on Marcus. The two enforcers holding him had loosened their grip in the confusion, and Ava seized the opportunity. She fired a warning shot into the air, the sound reverberating through the theater. "Let him go," she shouted, her voice commanding. For a moment, the enforcers hesitated, their masks obscuring any hint of emotion. Then, as if on silent command, they released Marcus and stepped back. He stumbled forward, catching himself on the edge of the stage. Ava rushed to his side, her eyes scanning him for injuries. "Can you move?" she asked urgently. Marcus nodded, wincing. "Yeah. I'll make it." Before they could retreat, Kane's voice rang out, calm and measured despite the chaos. "Impressive, Detective. But you've only delayed the inevitable." Ava turned to face him, her weapon trained on his chest. "It's over, Kane. This ends tonight." Kane tilted his head, almost as if amused. "You still don't see the bigger picture, do you? This isn't about one meeting, one network, or even one man. The society is an idea, Detective. And ideas, they don't die." Ava's jaw tightened, but she didn't waver. "You're right. Ideas don't die. But people do. And you're not walking out of here." Kane laughed, the sound echoing eerily in the empty theater. "Oh, I'm afraid you won't be taking me tonight. You see, Detective, while you were so focused on saving your partner, you missed the real game." Before Ava could process his words, the ground beneath her feet rumbled. A deafening explosion tore through the theater, sending debris raining down from the ceiling. Ava shielded Marcus as the blast threw them both to the ground. The smoke was thick, the air choking with dust and ash. Ava coughed, her ears ringing as she struggled to orient herself. Through the haze, she saw Kane retreating toward a hidden exit, flanked by two of his enforcers. She raised her weapon, but before she could fire, another explosion rocked the building, forcing her to duck for cover. When the smoke finally began to clear, Kane was gone. Ava pushed herself to her feet, ignoring the pain in her shoulder where she'd hit the ground. She turned to Marcus, who was coughing but otherwise seemed unharmed. "We need to get out of here," she said, helping him up. They stumbled through the wreckage, finally emerging into the cool night air. Emergency vehicles were already arriving, their sirens piercing the quiet. Ava leaned against a nearby lamppost, her mind racing. Kane had escaped, but the night wasn't a total loss. They had disrupted the society's meeting, exposed their operation. And they had survived. For now. Marcus rested a hand on her shoulder, his expression grim. "We'll get him," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "This isn't over." Ava nodded, her resolve hardening. "No, it's not. But next time, we're taking the fight to him." She glanced back at the theater, now engulfed in flames. The society had won this round, but Ava wasn't giving up. She'd seen their faces, disrupted their plans, and made them bleed. And she knew one thing for certain: the next time they crossed paths, she'd be ready. The theater burned behind Ava as she stood on the rain-soaked street, the flashing lights of emergency vehicles casting eerie shadows on the shattered windows. Her body ached from the explosions, her mind still reeling from Kane's parting words, "You missed the real game." Marcus leaned against the hood of a patrol car, clutching his ribs but refusing medical attention. He was pale and battered, but alive. Ava glanced at him, guilt gnawing at the edges of her focus. She had saved him, barely, but Kane had escaped, and the society's grip on the city remained intact. "You okay?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse. Ava nodded stiffly, though she wasn't sure if she was answering the question or convincing herself. "We stopped them tonight," she said, more to herself than to him. "But Kane's still out there." "And he's not going to stop," Marcus said, grimacing as he adjusted his stance. That explosion wasn't just a getaway. It was a message. Ava clenched her fists, the familiar fire of frustration and determination flaring in her chest. "Then we send him one of our own." By the time Ava returned to the precinct, dawn was breaking over the city. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and glistening under the pale morning light. She pushed through the precinct doors, her steps heavy but purposeful. The officers who had been waiting for news looked up as she entered, their faces a mix of relief and unease. She didn't stop to address them. There was no time for debriefs, no time for questions. She had a plan to make. In the war room, the investigation board loomed like a silent challenge. The faces of Sterling, Lang, Vargas, and now Duval stared back at her, joined by the grainy image of Kane she had pinned there earlier. Ava stood before it, her arms crossed, her mind racing. "We need to change our approach," she said aloud, though the room was empty save for Marcus, who had followed her in. "Kane thinks he's untouchable. He thinks we're playing catch-up. But what if we make him come to us?" Marcus frowned, his face still pale from the night's events. "You're talking about baiting him?" "Yes," Ava said sharply. "He's too careful to leave anything behind. Every move he makes is calculated. But if we disrupt his network, if we take out his key players, we can force his hand." Marcus leaned against the edge of the table, wincing slightly. "We've tried that before. His people are ghosts, Ava. Even Vargas barely knew who they all were." Ava's eyes narrowed as she turned back to the board. "But she gave us something. That spreadsheet, those names and symbols. It's a hierarchy, a chain of command. If we start at the bottom and work our way up, we'll find the cracks." She pointed to the list Vargas had provided, which had been hastily pinned to the board. "We go after the Jacks first. They're the enforcers, the ones who carry out his orders. They'll lead us to the Queens, and the Queens will lead us to Kane." Marcus studied the list, his expression skeptical but resigned. "It's a long shot. And even if we get to the Queens, Kane won't just sit around waiting for us." "That's the point," Ava said, her voice hard. "We're not waiting for him anymore. We're making him move." The first name on the list was Alexis Ward, a mid-level operative known to work as a fixer for the society. Her file was thin, but Ava recognized the pattern. Ward was careful, keeping her tracks covered and her face out of sight. But Vargas's notes had included a crucial detail: Ward had a weakness. A brother, Daniel, who had been in and out of trouble for years. Someone the society wouldn't bother protecting. Ava parked her car across the street from a dingy apartment complex on the city's east side. The building was crumbling, its walls tagged with graffiti and its windows patched with duct tape. She sat in the car for a moment, her eyes scanning the street. It was quiet, but the kind of quiet that buzzed with tension. Places like this always had eyes. She pulled her jacket tighter and stepped out of the car, her hand brushing against the holstered weapon at her side. The rain had left the air damp and heavy, the smell of wet asphalt clinging to everything. Ava crossed the street and entered the building, her footsteps echoing in the narrow hallway. Daniel Ward's apartment was on the 3rd floor. Ava knocked sharply, her knuckles striking the wood with deliberate force. For a moment, there was no response. Then, a voice called out from inside. "Who is it?" "Detective Ramirez," Ava said, her tone firm. "We need to talk." There was a long pause, followed by the sound of locks being undone. The door opened a crack, revealing a wiry man with bloodshot eyes and unkempt hair. He looked her up and down, his expression wary. "I don't know anything," he said quickly, trying to close the door. Ava jammed her foot in the gap, her expression unyielding. "I think you do. And if you don't want your sister to take the fall for you, you'll start talking." Daniel's face paled, and he stepped back, allowing Ava to enter. The apartment was a mess, empty beer cans and takeout containers littered every surface, and the air was thick with the stench of stale smoke. Ava ignored the filth, her focus entirely on the man in front of her. "Alexis Ward," she said, crossing her arms. "Where is she?" Daniel hesitated, his eyes darting toward the window. Ava stepped closer, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "Don't even think about running. You'll only make this worse." He swallowed hard, his hands trembling. "I don't know where she is. She doesn't tell me anything." "But she contacts you," Ava pressed. "She keeps tabs on you." Daniel nodded reluctantly. "Sometimes. She showed up a few weeks ago, said she needed to lay low. She didn't say why." "Where did she go?" Ava demanded. Daniel hesitated again, but the fear in his eyes was enough to crack his resolve. "There's a warehouse on the south side, near the docks. She said it was safe. That's all I know, I swear." Ava studied him for a moment, then nodded. "If you're lying to me, I'll be back. And next time, I won't be this polite." She turned and left the apartment, her mind already racing with possibilities. If Alexis Ward was hiding at the docks, it was the first real lead they'd had in days. And if Ward had information on Kane's operations, Ava was going to get it, no matter what it took. As she stepped back into the damp morning air, Ava felt the weight of the investigation pressing down on her. The society was vast, its network intricate and dangerous. But she wasn't backing down. Kane had made the first move, but now it was her turn. And she wasn't playing by the rules anymore. The warehouse loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the overcast sky. The docks were eerily quiet, the usual hum of activity conspicuously absent. Ava parked her car a block away, her senses on high alert. The air was heavy with the briny scent of the bay, the faint sound of water lapping against the docks the only noise cutting through the silence. She checked her weapon, double-checked her earpiece, functional this time, and pulled her jacket tighter against the chill. If Alexis Ward was here, Ava wasn't leaving without answers. She approached the warehouse cautiously, sticking to the shadows. The building showed no obvious signs of activity, but Ava knew better than to trust appearances. The society didn't operate in plain sight. They thrived on the unseen, the unnoticed. She circled the structure, her sharp eyes scanning for points of entry. A side door, its lock visibly rusted, caught her attention. She crouched low, her breath steady, and tested the handle. Locked. Of course. Fishing a slim tool from her pocket, Ava worked quickly, her movements efficient but quiet. The lock gave way with a faint click, and she slipped inside, her weapon drawn. The interior was dark, the air thick with the smell of oil and rust. Stacks of old crates lined the walls, their faded labels illegible. Ava moved silently, her flashlight sweeping the room in narrow arcs. The space seemed abandoned, but she knew better than to let her guard down. Then she heard it, a faint rustling sound, like fabric brushing against wood. She froze, her ears straining to pinpoint the source. It came again, this time from her left. Ava adjusted her grip on her weapon and moved toward the sound, her steps deliberate. The rustling grew louder as she approached a stack of crates. She rounded the corner and found herself face to face with Alexis Ward. The woman's eyes widened in shock, her hand darting toward the pocket of her jacket. Ava was faster. "Don't," she warned, her voice low and firm. "Hands where I can see them." Ward hesitated, her gaze flicking to Ava's weapon. Slowly, she raised her hands, her expression a mix of defiance and fear. "You've got the wrong person," she said, her voice sharp. "Save it," Ava snapped. "Alexis Ward, you're under arrest. But if you cooperate, we might be able to cut you a deal." Ward's lips pressed into a thin line, but she didn't argue. Ava gestured for her to step forward, keeping her weapon trained on her. She quickly frisked Ward, removing a switchblade and a burner phone from her pockets. The phone was cheap, the kind that could be tossed without a second thought. Ava slipped it into her own pocket for later. "Why are you here?" Ava demanded, her voice cold. "What's your connection to the society?" Ward smirked, though there was no humor in her expression. "You think you're going to crack me in some abandoned warehouse? You're wasting your time." Ava stepped closer, her eyes narrowing. "You don't understand what's at stake. Kane's empire is crumbling, and when it does, you're going to be left in the ashes. Help me now, and maybe you get to walk away from this." At the mention of Kane's name, Ward's smirk faltered. It was subtle, but Ava caught it. "You don't know anything about Kane," Ward said, her voice quieter now. "He's not someone you can just take down. He's different." "Different how?" Ava pressed. Ward hesitated, her gaze darting around the room as if she expected someone to be watching. "You don't get it," she said finally. "He doesn't just control people. He owns them. Their debts, their secrets, their families. He has leverage on everyone, even his own people." "And you?" Ava asked. "What does he have on you?" Ward's jaw tightened. For a moment, Ava thought she wouldn't answer. Then, in a barely audible whisper, Ward said, "My brother." Ava felt a pang of sympathy but quickly pushed it aside. "If you want to protect your brother, you need to help me. Where is Kane? What's his next move?" Ward shook her head. "I don't know. He doesn't tell me anything directly. Everything comes through intermediaries." "But," she hesitated, glancing at the crates around them. "There's a shipment coming through tomorrow night. Something big. I don't know what it is, but Kane's been pulling strings for weeks to make it happen." "Where?" Ava demanded. "The old shipyard on Pier 17, Ward said reluctantly. "But you didn't hear it from me." Before Ava could respond, a faint buzzing noise interrupted them. Her heart sank as she realized it was coming from the burner phone she'd confiscated. She pulled it out, her stomach twisting when she saw the message on the screen, "We see you." "Damn it," Ava hissed, shoving the phone back into her pocket. She grabbed Ward by the arm. "We need to move. Now." "What's going on?" Ward asked, panic creeping into her voice. "They're here," Ava said grimly. As if on cue, the sound of tires screeching outside echoed through the warehouse. Ava pulled Ward behind a stack of crates, her heart pounding. She peeked through a gap between the crates and saw two unmarked vans pull up outside, their doors sliding open to reveal masked enforcers armed with automatic weapons. "They're cleaning house," Ava whispered, more to herself than to Ward. "Kane can't risk you talking." Ward's face went pale. "You said you'd protect me." "I will," Ava said, her voice steely. "But you need to do exactly as I say. Stay low, stay quiet, and don't run unless I tell you to." The enforcers entered the warehouse, their movements methodical as they began sweeping the area. Ava's mind raced. She was outnumbered and outgunned, but she wasn't going to let the society win. She had Ward, and Ward had information. That was enough. For now. The sound of boots echoed ominously through the warehouse, each step deliberate and unhurried. Ava crouched behind the stack of crates, her breathing shallow as she assessed the situation. The enforcers were methodical, sweeping the room in pairs, their weapons raised and ready. She counted 4 of them immediately, but there were likely more outside. The society wasn't taking chances. Alexis Ward cowered beside her, trembling. Ava grabbed her arm, her grip firm but not unkind. "Stay quiet," she whispered, her voice sharp. "If they see you, we're both dead." Ward nodded frantically, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Ava leaned slightly around the edge of the crate, her sharp eyes scanning the room. The enforcers were spreading out, their search thorough. She needed to act fast. Her earpiece crackled faintly, a reassuring sign that her link to the precinct was still active. She pressed her hand to it, keeping her voice low. "This is Ramirez. I'm at the docks, Warehouse 43. Enforcers on site. Request immediate backup." The static-filled reply came almost immediately. "Copy that, Ramirez. Units are en route. ETA 10 minutes. 10 minutes. She didn't have 10 minutes. Ava turned her attention back to Ward. "When I tell you to move, you run for the side door. Don't stop, don't look back. Got it?" Ward's eyes widened in fear, but she nodded again. "What about you?" "I'll cover you," Ava said simply, though the odds of both of them making it out were slim. She didn't intend to die here, but she wasn't about to let Ward fall into the society's hands either. One of the enforcers moved closer, his flashlight beam slicing through the shadows. Ava tightened her grip on her weapon, her muscles coiled like a spring. The moment he rounded the corner, she struck, slamming the butt of her pistol into his temple. He crumpled to the ground without a sound. She quickly grabbed his weapon, an automatic rifle, and slung it over her shoulder. Her movements were practiced, efficient. This wasn't her first time outnumbered, and it wouldn't be her last. The commotion didn't go unnoticed. Another enforcer called out, his voice sharp. "Sector 3, report." When no response came, the remaining enforcers moved toward the downed man's last known location. Ava used the distraction to her advantage, pulling Ward to her feet and guiding her toward the side door. The faint glow of dawn outside was a cruel contrast to the darkness inside the warehouse. "Go," Ava whispered urgently, giving Ward a slight push. Ward hesitated for a fraction of a second, then bolted for the door, her footsteps nearly silent on the concrete floor. Ava stayed behind, her weapon raised as she covered Ward's escape. One of the enforcers spotted the movement and shouted, his rifle firing in rapid bursts. The bullets tore through the air, splintering the crates around Ava. She ducked low, returning fire with quick, controlled bursts. One enforcer went down, clutching his shoulder, but the others pressed forward. Their coordination was impressive, their movements precise. These weren't common thugs, they were trained, disciplined. The society's best. Ava's earpiece crackled again. "Ramirez, units are 2 minutes out. Hold tight." She gritted her teeth, her mind racing. She couldn't hold this position much longer. The enforcers were closing in, their suppressive fire forcing her to stay low. She glanced toward the side door and saw Ward disappear into the early morning light. At least she was out. That was one less life on Ava's conscience. But Ava wasn't out yet. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a flash grenade, standard issue, something she rarely used but was grateful to have now. She pulled the pin, counted to 3, and lobbed it toward the enforcers. The explosion of light and sound was deafening, disorienting the attackers and giving Ava the window she needed. She moved quickly, her body low to the ground as she darted toward the side door. Her heart pounded in her chest as she burst into the open air, the cool breeze a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the warehouse. She ducked behind a stack of shipping containers, catching her breath. The sound of sirens in the distance was a welcome relief. Backup was close. Ward was crouched a few feet away, her face pale but determined. "What now?" she asked, her voice shaking. Now we wait, Ava said, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of pursuit. The enforcers wouldn't give up easily, but they wouldn't risk a direct confrontation with the police either. They thrived in the shadows, and the arrival of law enforcement would force them to retreat. The sirens grew louder, and soon a convoy of squad cars arrived, their lights flashing. Officers poured out, weapons drawn, their movements swift and coordinated. Ava stepped out from behind the containers, raising her hands to show she wasn't a threat. "Detective Ramirez," she called out, her voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. "Suspect in custody. Enforcers still inside." The officers moved in, their tactical gear gleaming in the early morning light. Ava turned to Ward, her expression hard. "You're coming with me. You've got a lot more to tell." Ward swallowed hard but didn't resist. She knew as well as Ava that this was her best chance at survival. Back at the precinct, Ava sat across from Ward in the interrogation room. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting harsh shadows on the walls. Ward looked exhausted, her hands trembling slightly as she sipped from the cup of water Ava had given her. "You said Kane has something big planned," Ava began, her tone measured but firm. "Tell me everything." Ward hesitated, her gaze dropping to the table. "I already told you about the shipment. Pier 17, tomorrow night. That's all I know." "That's not enough," Ava said, leaning forward. "What's in the shipment? Weapons? Drugs? People?" Ward shook her head. "I don't know. Kane doesn't tell me anything directly. He just gives orders." Ava studied her, searching for any sign of deception. Ward seemed genuinely frightened, but fear wasn't enough. Ava needed answers. "You said Kane owns people," Ava pressed. "What does he have on you?" Ward's eyes flicked up to meet Ava's, and for the first time, Ava saw a crack in her defiance. "He knows where my brother is," she admitted quietly. "He said if I ever crossed him, Daniel would be next." Ava's jaw tightened. Kane's web of control was more insidious than she'd imagined. He didn't just manipulate people, he broke them, piece by piece. "Help me bring him down," Ava said, her voice softening. "Help me end this." Ward hesitated, her fear warring with something else, something that looked like hope. Finally, she nodded. "Okay. But if we do this, you'd better be ready. Kane doesn't leave loose ends." Ava leaned back in her chair, her expression grim. "Neither do I." The night was cold and quiet as Ava crouched behind a stack of rusted shipping containers at Pier 17. The faint hum of the city loomed in the distance, but here, on the edge of the bay, the only sounds were the gentle lapping of water against the dock and the occasional groan of metal in the wind. She adjusted her earpiece, her pulse steady but her mind razor-sharp. Tonight, it ended one way or another. The information Alexis Ward had provided was thin, but it was enough, a shipment arriving by boat, something critical to Kane's operation. Whatever was in those crates, it was important enough for the society to risk exposure. And Kane would be here, or at least, his most trusted people would. Ava had made sure of that by leaking just enough misinformation to force his hand. This wasn't just a raid. It was a trap. Through the earpiece, Marcus's voice crackled softly. "Team Alpha in position on the west side. No movement yet. You good, Ramirez?" Ava pressed a finger to her earpiece. "I'm good. Team Bravo?" "We're set on the north perimeter," came the reply. "No sign of the target yet." Ava took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the pier. The shipping containers cast long shadows under the floodlights, creating a maze of potential cover and ambush points. She knew the risks. Kane's people were ruthless, and they wouldn't hesitate to turn this pier into a battleground if they felt cornered. The faint sound of an engine grew louder, cutting through the stillness. Ava's eyes snapped to the water, where a small cargo ship was approaching the dock. Its lights were dimmed, its movements precise. She spoke into her earpiece, her voice low. "Target inbound. Everyone hold positions until my signal." The ship slowed as it reached the dock, and a group of figures emerged from the shadows to meet it. Ava counted 6, heavily armed, their faces obscured by masks. The Society's enforcers. One of the men stepped forward, gesturing toward the ship. A crane arm on the deck groaned to life, lowering a large, unmarked container onto the pier. Ava's heart pounded as she watched the scene unfold. This was it. Whatever was in that container, it was the key to Kane's operation. If she could seize it, and the people involved, she could finally dismantle the Society. Kane wasn't visible, but she knew better than to assume he wasn't watching. He was always watching. Team Alpha, she whispered into the mic, move in on my mark. Team Bravo, hold for backup in case they try to flee. As the enforcers began unloading smaller crates from the container, Ava's grip tightened on her weapon. She steadied her breathing, her mind calculating every angle, every possible outcome. Then, with a firm voice, she gave the order. Go! The air erupted with shouts and gunfire as Team Alpha moved in, their tactical gear gleaming under the floodlights. Ava surged forward, her weapon raised as she emerged from cover. The enforcers reacted immediately, their training evident as they returned fire and took cover behind the crates. Ava ducked behind a container, her heart hammering as bullets ricocheted off the metal. She peeked out just long enough to take down one of the enforcers with a precise shot. The man crumpled, his weapon clattering to the ground. Bravo, move in. Cut off their escape. Ava barked into her earpiece. From the north, more officers swarmed the pier, their movements coordinated and efficient. The enforcers were outnumbered, but they fought with the desperation of men who knew there was no way out. One by one, they fell, until only 2 remained. They dropped their weapons and raised their hands, their masks hiding any expression of fear or defiance. Ava approached cautiously, her weapon still trained on them. "Where's Kane?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Neither man answered. One of them simply laughed, a low, bitter sound. "You think this changes anything? You think you've won?" Ava's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. She gestured for the officers to cuff them and turned her attention to the shipping container. Whatever was inside, it had to be significant. She approached it slowly, her weapon still drawn, and signaled for one of the officers to open it. The container's doors groaned as they swung open, revealing rows of crates stacked neatly inside. Ava's stomach twisted as she stepped closer, her flashlight illuminating the markings on the crates. Weapons. Enough to arm a small army. But that wasn't all. In the back of the container, she saw something that made her blood run cold, a chair, bolted to the floor, with heavy restraints attached. This wasn't just a shipment. It was a mobile torture chamber. Her earpiece crackled. "Ramirez, we've got something on the west side. You're gonna want to see this." Ava's heart sank. She stepped back from the container and made her way toward the west side of the pier, her weapon still at the ready. When she arrived, Marcus was standing over a body, one of the enforcers who had been taken down in the firefight. His mask had been removed, revealing a familiar face. "Sterling," Ava whispered, her voice barely audible. It was him. The man who had been her ally, her informant, and, ultimately, her enemy. The man who had betrayed her to the Society. And now, he was dead. Marcus looked up at her, his expression grim. What the hell was he doing here? Ava shook her head, her mind racing. "I don't know. But this wasn't a coincidence. Kane sent him." As she spoke, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw an unknown number flashing on the screen. Her stomach tightened as she answered, the voice on the other end sending a chill down her spine. "Well done, Detective," Kane said, his tone smooth and mocking. "You've put on quite the show tonight. Where are you?" Ava demanded, her voice cold. Kane chuckled softly. "Oh, I'm afraid I'm not quite as reckless as you'd like me to be. But don't worry. You've earned my attention. And that's not something many people can say." Ava's grip on the phone tightened. "This is over. We've got your people, your shipment. You're done. Kane's laugh was low and menacing. You've won a battle, detective. But the war? That's just beginning. The line went dead. Ava lowered the phone, her jaw tight. She looked at Marcus, who was watching her with a mix of concern and determination. He's not going to stop, she said quietly. Marcus nodded. Neither are we. Ava turned back to the pier, the flames of determination burning brighter than ever. Kane had slipped through her fingers again, but she wasn't giving up. The society's network was unraveling, and she was going to pull every last thread until it collapsed. One battle at a time, one step closer to justice. Because no matter how many pieces Kane moved on the board, Ava was determined to checkmate him.